Hi, I'm Larry Magid, host or co-host of Connect Safely Live. And as always, I'm joined by Kerry Gallagher, our Director of K-12 Education. Kerry, how you doing?
I'm great, Larry. How are you doing today?
I'm good. And speaking of K-12 education, we are so honored to have Esther Wojcicki. I'm going to hold up her book. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but Esther recently published a book called How to Raise Successful People.
We
And we
can
will
see it
talk,
perfectly.
and she did a good job at that. We'll talk a little bit about her daughters. Uh, but also, I've known Esther for years. She's a teacher here in Palo Alto. Uh, Actually, teacher isn't even the word. She's I'll let her describe what she does. It's technically called teaching, but it's much more than that. Esther, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm honored and very excited to be here.
Well, we're really excited to have you. And, you know, you, in this book, and I'm looking for my notes there, in this book, you talk about how to raise successful people, both in terms of a parent and as an educator. And I think your book works very well for both parents and educators. And by the way, it's an amazing read. In addition to all the advice you give, you tell stories of your own childhood, of your parents, emigration from Europe, of how you raised your children. And those stories bring so much richness to it and really lend credibility to what you call TRIC. And I'm going to let you talk about what TRIC stands for, but I'll give you a hint. It has to do with trust and respect and other things. It's such a simple but profound message. And I'm usually not a big fan of these, initials and all that, but it really is the trick. I mean, I'll say it: trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. All things that we talk a lot about at Connect Safely. And I know, Kerry, you talk about it as both a parent and an educator. So before we get into the specifics, I want you to talk about the word successful, because you talk about raise successful people. How do you define successful?
So I, of course, have my own special definition of successful, what I think successful means to me. There's a lot of people that have their own definitions, but I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's when you feel empowered and supported to follow your dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are able to achieve that, it can happen in 1 year, it can happen in a few weeks, it can happen in a lifetime, but that you are living out the dream that you had thought about for a while.
Mm-hmm.
That's what successful is.
And it's not necessarily tied to income or professional success. I mean, it could be lots of types of success, right?
It can be lots of types of success. It is not tied to income, and it's not tied to title. And because I know a lot of very wealthy people with very long titles who are pretty miserable. Mm-hmm. And I would say that that's not success. I think success also means that you feel satisfied with the way that you have lived your life, to at least to some degree. And many people are not very happy. And so I would
And one
say,
thing I love about your book, because I obviously know of your children. I've met a couple of them, certainly, and at 23andMe, and Susan, who's the CEO of Connect Safely. I know you have a daughter who's a professor at a medical school in San Francisco. So these are all very successful people. But what's interesting is when you read the book, it's not like you drilled that into them. It's not like you thought, gave them all of these lessons and all this structure and discipline to make sure that they would somehow succeed in business. They lived very independent and free and respected lives, and it turned out they actually wound up achieving what many parents dream for their children, but try to drill into them and often fail at that.
That's right. No, I didn't have an agenda. My only agenda for them as children was I wanted them to be able to follow their dreams, but also have enough income to have a place to live. Mm-hmm. And enough food to eat, and to have friends and family and support. So they could do that on any path they chose. My first daughter, Susan, she majored in French and English lit, history and lit, actually. So, I thought I said after she graduated, so now what are you going to do? And she wasn't sure. And I said, well, I don't know, do you want to be a history teacher or a literature teacher, or what would you want to be, a writer? What do you want to do? She had no clue. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, she was the opposite of pre-professional.
If I could, I know Kerry had a question, but I just want to follow up on that. That no clue is so interesting. I remember giving a commencement speech at a college a number of years ago, and it was during the early days of the web. And I said, how many people here think you might want to be webmasters? That was the term at the time. And a lot of people raised their hand and said, how many people plan to be a webmaster when you started college? And no one raised their hand because it didn't exist when they started college. And it's so important to train people to be lifelong learners and adaptable and to deal with what the world gives them, because none of us knew what would happen, and none of us have a clue as to what's going to happen tomorrow, or certainly not years from now.
That's right. Well, and all three of my daughters ended up in positions that didn't exist for the most part. And they didn't, their path to the top. I actually have a slide in the presentations that I give that has a star at one end, and then it has a path that starts at the bottom end, and the path goes around and around and around and around and around in circles, because that's what they did before they got there. They went around in a lot of different circles. And I think the book has a lot of the stories, but there's even more stories about, how long it took them to get to where they're going. And, they didn't conceptualize that either. And so that's one of the messages I have for parents is, I think that we just want to teach them to be lifelong learners and teach them how to adapt as best they can. I mean, right now we're facing a COVID crisis that we never anticipated a year ago or even 6 months ago. And the question is, how do you cope with this? And there's no pattern, there's no right way. You have to be able to think and get yourself out of this situation, as best you can. And
Esther, that really is a nice transition to my question that I had, because I really loved your definition of success as, you're happy and you have what you need, right? And it's not about having any more than that. And it's not about meeting other people's definition of success. My question for you is, if there's someone who's watching who is, maybe in their 20s, maybe they're just like your daughter and they just finished school, and they're not having an actual graduation. And so maybe their gateway to success is looking a little bit differently. Could you talk a little bit about that, a little more about that circular path, about how maybe there are times in your life where you're not feeling successful, but that doesn't mean you're not a successful person, right?
That's right. There are lots of times in your life when you're not feeling successful. And, as a matter of fact, I think one of them's right now. Most people are not feeling successful. But, you have to look, there are opportunities. There's always an opportunity. And one of the statements that someone made that I think is a good statement is, never let a huge crisis go to waste. Because, there's a lot of opportunity in the crisis that we have now if we stop trying to follow the same path that we would have before the crisis. And so you just have to think about, like, what can you do to get through this and to help your life be better, but also the lives of other people be better. Because it's hard for you to have a really satisfactory career, life, whatever, independently, alone, isolated. We're all part of a community, and whatever you do helps other people also. So you might want to think about that as well. What can you do to make the lives of others better and somehow improve your life at the same time?
So I think that's a really great, oh, sorry, Larry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say this very conversation is an example. Connect Safely had no plans to do a webcast. We have a podcast we do, but we never thought we'd do a twice weekly webcast. Kerry, when you were in college, I don't suppose you took television as one of your majors, but now you're, for all practical purposes, co-hosting a television show. And who knows, maybe
in my at-home studio.
Maybe one of the networks is watching and you'll get swooped into network broadcasting. But, we just never know. And opportunities come. I mean, when I look at my career, I don't even want to, well, I'll give you one hint. Because I was a political activist at Berkeley, an undergraduate, because I was a radical, basically, fighting against the war, fighting for free speech, fighting for civil rights, I wound up in the business section of the LA Times. Now, that path is completely illogical. That's the opposite way you would have gotten into become a writer for a major newspaper, is to be a radical in the 60s. But because of connections I made and things changed, one of the people who covered me at Berkeley as an activist was an editor at the Times, and they made me into their first technology columnist. So that's one of many examples where, because I followed my passion and did what I wanted to do, and I am very proud of being an activist looking back, I wound up succeeding, ironically, in the very world that was kind of the opposite of where I was.
I can't even tell you too, and my career is certainly not as spicy or as long yet as Larry's, but
I'm older.
I certainly did not envision not just doing a webcast, but many of the things that I am tasked with doing in my roles now that I embrace were not what I envisioned for myself when I was choosing what to study in school. And I think, you know, Esther, you're talking to that. And one of the things I love about your definition of success is that your book is also kind of a guide to the essential values that successful people really need to hold true to. And that's that word trick that Larry was talking about. So I wonder if we could start by talking about the first two, the T and the R, the trust and respect. So what does it mean to have trust, and what does it mean to show respect in your view?
So the first thing, trust and respect are the most important. I think you can't have any of the others if you don't at least have trust and respect. And I think that starts really early, and it starts with your parents. And your parents, one of the things that they need to do is to trust you as a child. Because when they trust you, and that can be just with little things, you know, they trust you to set the table. They trust you to, I mean, I used to trust my daughter, Susan, she was only 5, to go out and get the baguette every morning. You know, we lived in France, and she just walked down the street and with her sister, who was 3, and got the baguette. And it's actually was very safe, and she felt really good about herself, and that expanded to a lot of her life. But, you know, a lot of that isn't available today in many places. But still, there's other little things you can do to trust your children. And then what happens is that when your parents trust you, then you start to trust yourself. And the more that they trust you, the more you trust yourself. And then you respect your own ideas, your parents respect those ideas. And as a result, you pursue those ideas. And you want your children to have their own ideas. A lot of parents, they're concerned, you know, that their children have ideas that, you know, seem a little crazy. Well, I just remember some of the crazy ideas that my kids had. And, you know, I just, I went along with a lot of those ideas. They weren't hurtful, they were just crazy. And so, you know, I think it's an opportunity through childhood for kids to take their crazy ideas and perhaps do some of them as they get older. You have to remember as parents that it's their life they're leading, and that's not your life recreated. And so you have to give them that opportunity to be who they want to be. And that, I know sometimes that feels difficult to do, but it's the key to them being successful and happy. And I can just give you an example of my neighbor across the street, and I have to give her a lot of credit for what she did. She has an older boy who dropped out of school at Pomona College and decided that he wanted to get married and be a farmer with no education. And she was not too happy about that. You know, just be a farmer, and he didn't even own the land. Anyway, she supported him during this crazy time in his life. He got married, he had 4 kids, he was still a farmer, and now today he's 35 years old, and he decided that he wants to be a civil engineer. And he went back to school, and now he's doing great work as a civil engineer. But what's great about this story is that he followed his dream. He became what he wanted to be, and his parents supported that. And, you know, it's kind of tough when your kid doesn't go to college and, you know, you're college educated people yourself, but I give her a lot of credit for letting this happen.
I can think of so many. I can think of so many stories, including when my son graduated from UCLA with a degree in ethnomusicology. And I said, well, go for your teacher credential, play it safe. And he said, no, Dad, I want to perform. And Will is doing extremely well as a performer, not necessarily this moment, but in general, he's succeeding in the music business. And there are so many examples of that, of people who follow their dream versus parental advice. You talk about trust.
Larry,
Yes,
I have just one follow-up question about trust and
sure.
respect, if that's
Sure.
okay. I love how you talked about respecting your children and adults respecting younger people as they're growing and developing. But I wonder if we could talk, just because of the political landscape and the talking heads and what we're seeing in the media, and therefore our children see it. What is it that adults can do to model respectful behavior with other adults while their children are watching, even if you don't agree with those adults, or even if you don't like those adults very much? What is it that we can do better to really model that? You know, we want to show our children respect, but they're also watching how we're interacting with other adults, right?
So I think that's a great question. It's really applicable to what's going on in the country at this time. And I think one thing that we can model is that we listen to the other side. And, you know, I have my own strong political opinions, my own opinions about how we should function in this COVID era. But I also think it's really important for me to listen to what other people are saying, because we all have the same goal, and that is we want a better world. And they just have a different path. So while I might not agree with them, I definitely think I owe them listening and not telling them off the bat that they're wrong. They have whatever they're saying, there's truth to what they're saying too.
Yeah.
So you model that for your children, and they will then model that, they will follow in your model.
That's so true. And, you know, you and I are Facebook friends, and I see that on your Facebook feed as well. You are not shy about expressing your opinions, but you're also respectful to the conversation that follows. You know, we talked about trust and respect. The next letter in the word trick is I, for independence. And I'm going to play maybe devil's advocate just for a moment, because my children grew up at a time when there was so much concern about abduction, which, by the way, I, until very recently, was on the board of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And you say on page 31 of your book, you point out that the vast majority of child exploitations are not stranger abductions. Even sexual online exploitation is almost always unfortunately, a trusted adult. But, you know, there is a line between independence and maybe going too far, maybe doing something that could be dangerous. So how do you know when, you know, independent, when you're being appropriate, and when maybe you're giving them freedom to get into some serious trouble?
Well, you have to look at each independent act, especially with small children, of what you're going to be allowing them to do. I mean, you don't want to allow small children who don't understand traffic to walk down the street by themselves. You don't want to allow a child that can't swim next to a swimming pool. Well, they can't. So that's one of the things that I did early on that I felt was really important, because my goal, I had one single goal when my daughters were born, and that was I wanted to make them as independent as possible. And so that meant that I had to teach them things that, you know, might be to prevent dangerous situations. And one was a swimming pool. We have a swimming pool in the backyard. So they all learned to swim very early, at times when people thought children didn't learn to swim. And that was just to make sure that they knew how to swim, and that if they ever fell in the pool, I wouldn't have to worry about it. And I mean, like my middle daughter, Janet, she learned to swim at a year, 12 months. And of course, that was because Susan, who was already 2, could swim, and I want Janet to, you know, have a problem. But I also then taught them, you know, a lot of the traffic stuff, and, you know, how to walk down the street. Today, it is harder because we have a national epidemic of fear.
Yes.
And it's actually embedded in state legislatures in multiple states, where they've passed legislation saying you cannot let your child walk down the street by himself until he's a certain age. So I think that there's other ways that you can give your children independence. One of them that I talked about in the book, which is pretty funny actually, is I dropped my 9-year-old grandchildren, two of them, at Target so they could do shopping by themselves.
Yeah.
They were shopping for school supplies. And I still to this day think there's nothing dangerous at Target. I love Target, and they've got everything there, and the kid, the people that work there seem pretty friendly. And so they went shopping by themselves and bought their school supplies. And then they called me because, of course, I have the credit card. And, but a lot of people are afraid of even doing that. I think there's little steps you can take that give your child a sense of independence, and then you can explain to them one of the reasons why you don't give them more independence until they get older. So now I have a grandchild who is 15 years old, and he's 6'2". So of course I'm not too worried about him walking down the street because he's that big. But I also have another grandchild who's 12, and she's about 4'11". So she's not going down the street by herself for a while. So I think, but if they go together, again, that's okay, because then there's one of them that looks pretty adult and the other one looks a little like a child. So I think you have to calculate. You don't be crazy with fear, but you have to give them as much independence as seems reasonable.
And in your book, you correctly pointed out that much of what people fear is based on incorrect assumptions. Crime, in fact, is down, it's not up. There are fewer wars, homicide is down, not up. More people are being educated. And you pointed out that in general, people are healthier. Now, that particular one may be questionable at this very moment.
Right.
And so here we have a situation where caution is definitely appropriate. I don't believe fear is appropriate, but we have a situation, and politically, some people are arguing we shouldn't be cautious, or we should be less cautious, or calling caution fear. So we're in a very kind of an upside down situation at the moment.
We're in a pretty upside down situation at the moment. So I do think that, we need to respect the epidemiologists, the doctors, Dr. Fauci. We need to respect all those people and the hard work they're doing. And I mean, the ER doctors that are putting their life on the line, and they're all recommending that we wear masks and that we have social distancing and that we wear gloves, I guess, if you're going to be in a situation where you're touching things. I don't see how that's so hard for people to do. It's so trivial. I mean, they're putting their life on the line. All you're doing is keeping 6 feet away. So, I followed their recommendations because they're on the front of the line and I'm just a soldier. And I recommend that everybody follow those recommendations. They're not hard.
Right. And again, there is, fear is one thing, but there is such a thing as caution. And, I'm not afraid of my children being on the street, but I'd be afraid of them jaywalking on a busy street, because that, in fact, is dangerous. And so, I think that's something we work very hard to Connect Safely, is try to work against fear, because fear paralyzes, but still recommend people take proper precautions when they're online or offline, or in this case, when they have to go to the supermarket.
Right. I think it's really important for kids to know how to protect themselves, and to start to develop these common sense behaviors of how to, don't walk on the wrong side of the street, don't run out in traffic, and online, I spend a lot of time teaching kids what fake news looks like, and how to recognize fake news and how not to share anything that is fake news. But basically what I'm saying to them is, the internet, it's kind of like real life. You need to be able to understand how to protect yourself. Real life is only dangerous if you don't know how to protect yourself. And the same thing is true with the internet. You should be able to connect in a way that makes sense. And you can, as you say here, you've got a great name, Connect Safely. There's no reason why everybody can't learn how to do that.
So we've talked now about trust and respect and independence. And I feel like we could talk about independence for a long time. I have so many questions, but for the sake of time, I wanted to move on to talk about the C of TRIC, which is collaboration. So you and I are both educators. We both work with adolescents. And so I have a two-part question for you. Number one, for the teachers who are out there, one of the things that I often talk about is the difference as an educator between group work and true collaboration. So I would love to hear your take on that. And then my second question, which I can ask again later if you want me to remind you what it is, you know, in the workforce, when we are asking people for help and, you know, riffing off other people's ideas, we call that collaboration. Like, I can't imagine doing my job without my team at my school. But sometimes when our students collaborate, some of us may accuse them of cheating. So under what circumstances is it true collaboration? How can we really embrace that with the children that we're charged with caring for and educating?
So I think education in general should always be collaborative, because education is really all about relationships, learning your relationship with the world, your relationship with other people, your relationship with the teacher. So everything that you are learning has to have a relevance to the real world. And this idea of, I love the way you brought this up, because it's always been a pet peeve of mine, this idea that when kids work together on homework or work together on any kind of project, it's like cheating.
Yeah.
I mean, that definition actually in the 1990s, it was everywhere. You know, I remember sending home papers with students and the parents were required to sign that the child did the work themselves. It's like, and of course, I did not believe in this. That was one of the things that created a little bit of friction with me and the administration, because I was like, look, I want them to learn this. And I don't care if they're working with a friend, they're going to learn it. And this is the most effective way. So I think collaboration is the key to effective education. I think one of the problems that Zoom is not working well for most teachers now is because they set it up in a way the teacher gets to talk. You as the teacher, I can mute everybody, all quiet, right? They're all sitting there listening to me, or probably not listening, daydreaming about something else. But what kind of interaction is that? What kind of collaboration is that? So I would much prefer to have kids put themselves in groups, two or three, pick two or three friends that you want to work with, and let's work on this project. Here's the project, you pick your friend. The difference between that and group work that the teacher assigns is the teacher picks the friends.
Right.
And the teacher said, well, you're going to, and sometimes just doing that alone, I don't know, of course you can all think back to your childhood about the person you least wanted to interact with, who's in your group. No.
Right.
So I've never done that. I was like, pick your friend. The goal is to learn this material or to create this project or to do something exciting. And, you know, and it works out really well.
You know, when I was in school, there was so much about memorization, right? Memorize this, memorize that. And there was this thing that was actually invented in your garage. I think it begins with a G. Google, that's what it's called, Google. I knew I could come up with the name of it, which really does fundamentally change how we acquire and access knowledge. So I had to, for example, in my international relations class, memorize the capital and head of state of every country in the world.
Oh.
And I have no clue the head of state of most countries, but I know how to find out in a matter of seconds. But more importantly, what are they doing?
Larry, they're not head of state anymore.
Oh, the ones I'd memorize, that's for sure. That's for sure. That's a good point, because that's the other thing, is how knowledge is so fungible and expires. But my point is that what you do with that information, or how you can continue to learn new information, strikes me as so important. And I couldn't possibly do my work if I couldn't collaborate, either with people I work with in person or the internet as a teaching tool for me, that allows me to not have to fill my brain with trivia, but hopefully use my brain to actually understand what all those facts mean.
Right. So that's right. Every single person has one of these in their pocket. I mean, sometimes they have two. And that has all the things in it that you memorized that are completely useless right now, because it's impossible to remember all those things that we were told to memorize as a child. The only thing that it does is, if you can just remember that you do know that every country has a capital and every country has a president, and you can then go here and look it up. That's the key. Learning how to access that information on Google is the key. Or if you want to take some time to, learn something new, it could be baking cookies or whatever, you can learn that all on YouTube videos. They're everywhere. And YouTube actually has this new site called Learn at Home, which is special, just videos for learning. And that's much more effective than assigning kids all this stuff that they're never going to want to memorize and never going to learn again.
So we have a question from the audience, but before we ask that, I have a quick follow-up to what you just mentioned. And so the last two items we talked about were independence and collaboration. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. Are those two concepts at odds with each other, actually, Esther? Are you giving confusing advice here? How do those fit together?
They fit together. You come up with an idea, something that you want to work on, something you're interested in doing, and find a friend to do it with. We all do things together. No one likes to exercise alone. That's why we even have that Peloton out there, right? We want to, and they're paying all that extra money to watch somebody else exercise with you. So we're social animals, which is one of the reasons why it's hard for us to be isolated, and which is why if you're going to use a Zoom call, let the kids talk to each other, let them interact, because the number one thing those kids are missing, it's not the homework, it's their friends.
Yeah.
And so let them be in contact with their friends online. So yes, it's not in conflict. It works together with that.
Great answer. I'm glad I got to ask that one because I know that there are probably people thinking that. But I'm 100% in agreement with you. So to our audience question, we have a question from Akram Karame. He's watching on Facebook Live. Thanks for watching, Akram. He's asking, are we giving our students the skills they need to solve the problems our generation is leaving with them? So we won't solve all the problems for our children. Are we giving them the skills that they need to solve the problems that we will leave behind?
As long as we're requiring them to memorize for 90% of the time, I would say no. We need to cut back on that memorization and give kids an opportunity to explore and to try to problem solve and to try that new method out. Because otherwise they're going to grow up to be adults waiting for the answer. It's like the snowplow parent. They clear the way. And so the person that grows up and they like waiting for someone to clear the way, and there is nobody there to clear the way. They have to do it themselves. So I advise people to stop clearing the road for their kids and prepare their kids for the road instead.
Such good advice.
They prepare their kids for the road by giving this opportunity to try new things.
That's right. You want to know how to drive, but you don't need to know every road because there are maps or Google Maps or whatever you call them. The last word in TRIC, or the last letter in TRIC, is K. And I think in many ways that's the most important letter, because I can think of lots of people who are really smart and really successful, but the ones that really I love that have meaning to me are the ones who are kind. And so talk about kindness and what that means, not only from the standpoint of raising somebody who's better and decent, but also how it ties into success.
So kindness is one of the most important. Kindness, compassion, empathy. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I learned early on, I think I learned this as a child, but couldn't put this into effect until I became a teacher myself, is that people will perhaps forget what you said. They'll also maybe even forget what you might have lectured about, but they'll never forget how you made them feel, ever. And so one of the things that my students have always said about me, and actually I don't have this piece of paper here, I was just cleaning out my office and I found this piece of paper. It was a class evaluation. Every student had an opportunity in my class to evaluate the teacher and the program and everything else. And this student had given me a top score. And he said, it wasn't because I had the best lectures or because I had the best course curriculum, although he liked it a lot. He said, the reason that he thought it was the best is because I cared about him as a human being. And that is what I think is the most important part of school and part of kindness. People will respond to kindness in ways that they would never respond in any other situation. And that's why also, talk about T.R.I.C. in the corporate world. If people treat their employees really well, those employees will be loyal and passionate about making sure that they do a good job. And so it works in all aspects of life, not just parenting, not just school, but it works in all different aspects.
I'm so glad you said that. When I think back at elementary school, I have no idea what these teachers even taught, but I can name you the 2 teachers who were kind to me, who really made me feel good. And I can't even remember the rest of the teachers, but there were 2, and I still know their names, who were just so kind. And Mr. Ash and Mr. Long treated me respectfully, and it meant so much to me to this day.
Yeah, well, I have to tell my daughter now to close the door, please. So yes, this is, I'm surrounded by my children who are extremely independent and extremely interested in telling me all kinds of things that I should be doing.
So Esther, while you were just talking during the last segment there, and I wasn't on screen because you were talking, one of my children snuck into my room and crawled across the floor to get her sneakers, which she left up here, because she wants to go out and she's trying to very independently, without any prompting from us, learn how to become a Pogo Stick master. So that all happened behind the curtain here during Connect Safely Live, and none of you all saw it.
I saw it.
Yeah, Larry saw it.
You saw this, yes.
I have one follow. I know we are running low on time, Larry, but I have one more question
Sure.
about kindness. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So one of the things, unfortunately, that I think, and I'm sorry, I keep going back to the messages our children are getting from media, but I think one of the things that they're getting from watching adults behave in media is that showing kindness is somehow showing weakness. How can we reinforce that showing kindness is actually a demonstration of courage and strength, which is the opposite of weakness?
That is actually really important, because showing kindness is strength, and people need to know that now. I mean, it is so, we have on the national level, we have a lot of things on television that we probably don't want our kids to watch, and a lot of behaviors that are really bad, poorly, I mean, it's hard to imagine that we're watching all this. But I think that the other thing that you can tell your kids, there was that book, everything I ever needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten or something like that.
Yep.
So we can say that some of the leaders that we have today might have missed out on those learnings in kindergarten. And while they are, adults and doing things in positions of responsibility, we still need to follow those rules, and we're sorry that those people somehow missed out on those rules, but we can continue anyway, and the majority of the world can continue with treating each other with kindness. That's how the world works. Every major religion, they all agree on kindness and love and treating your fellow man with dignity and respect. That's the most important thing.
That's such good advice. We do have to wrap up, but I think the takeaway from this conversation, I want to put your book back on screen again. And again, even if you're not a teacher or even a parent, this is a remarkable book. And I rarely say that. I really do. I just love the stories of your own childhood and the stories of how you raised your children. And I hope it's made into a movie. I actually think it would be a great movie. And maybe you can get your friend James Franco to play a cameo. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Esther also has had some amazingly successful students, James Franco being one of many who have gone through her program, but that's a whole other issue. But I do think that the takeaway here is that success is not about how much money you make. It's not about, how important your title is. And this is a trite statement, but nobody looks back on their deathbed and says, gee, I wish I made an extra $10,000 during my life. It's how you treat people, what we leave behind. And Esther, I know one of the things that you're going to leave behind is a legacy of some amazing, now young people, future adults, people who may be our leaders going forward. Some of them are already our leaders to some extent. And I want to thank you for having made those contributions to society, because we all benefit from the young people who you and Kerry and other great teachers and parents bring into the world and mentor. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And also, I just want to thank all my fellow teachers, because I think that teaching is one of the most rewarding and noblest profession that anybody can pursue. So, and I know your daughter is doing it. And so I am very impressed. And that's great.
Thank you, Esther.
Thanks so much.